Welcome back to Luke's Properties YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to explain why you haven't got your first rent to rent deal yet. I'm going to walk you through a framework called the MOSA framework that I use in my program to teach my students. So you're getting a little bit of inside information here. I'm going to tell you why your rent to rent business hasn't taken off yet. And then I'm going to show you the exact things you should be doing every day to achieve rent to rent success. So let's get into it. So first, we're going to start with the first principles of money. Now, in order to understand business, you first need to understand money and how it works. So money flows where value is created. Let me say that again. Money flows where value is created. Value is created when a problem is solved. So when we think about rent to rent, we need to think about solving problems. So let's put that into context for you. So the problems that your ideal client, a landlord, would be experiencing would be vacancy issues, so empty properties, empty rooms, maintenance issues, things breaking in the property, having to reinvest into the property throughout the year, so running maintenance costs, operational costs, tenant management, so dealing with tenants. This is another problem that landlords don't like to deal with. Property damage, so a damaged property. If maintenance doesn't get addressed and dealt with professionally, then a small maintenance issue can turn into property damage. And if you're a landlord who isn't proactive with your maintenance, then a small problem can turn into a big problem. And this can turn into property damage, which is going to be an even more expensive issue to fix and become a bigger problem, and maybe even make the property lose value. And then finally, legal compliance. Now, there's so many rules, especially with HMO regulations. In my investment area, which is an Article 4 area, there's a lot of updates. The rules and regulations are always changing and evolving. As a landlord, the property has to be electrical safe. You need certificates. In some areas like Wales, you have to be Rent Smart Wales licensed as a landlord now. If you have an HMO, you have to have an HMO license. If you're in Article 4, then you have to apply for planning permission as well as an HMO license. So there's so many rules and regulations when it comes to being a landlord that sometimes it can become overwhelming. So legal compliance is another landlord problem. Now let's have a look at the tenant problems or guest problems. So the high living costs at the moment are a reason why rent to rent works, because the product that you bring to the market is an affordable, convenient room, bedsit or flat. And with rent to rent, you normally price that accommodation £300 to £400 less than a one bedroom property on the open market. Because remember, if a tenant was to go on Rightmove, for example, and try and rent their own one bedroom flat, that's going to cost them, in my investment area, around £750, £800, maybe £850 per month. Then they have to pay their bills on top. So council tax, electric, gas, water, which could easily be another £200, which adds up to be around £900 to £1,000 per month just to rent a one bedroom flat. Whereas if a tenant comes and rents one of my rooms, it's going to cost them between £500 to £550 per month with all the bills included. So they're getting to save around £300 to £400 per month. So high living costs are a problem for tenants and guests. The next problem they experience is flexibility needs. A lot of the tenants we have in our rent to rents, they only need 3-month tenancies, 6-month tenancies, 9-month tenancies. And again, on the open market, if they were to go on Rightmove or Zoopla and try and rent a property from an estate agent, most estate agents only work with tenants that want a 12-month contract. So that rules out anyone who needs 9 months, 6 months, 3 months, or even a few weeks, which creates a problem for those short-term guests or tenants because there isn't much accommodation for them. They may only be working in that area for 6 months, but they can't get a property from an estate agent. So what normally happens is they end up living in a hotel for 6 months, which is expensive and inconvenient. The next problem for short-term tenants or guests is utility management. So when you move into a property, you normally set up all the utilities if you're going to be there for a long term. But if you're only going to be there for 3 months, 6 months or 9 months, then you don't want to set up the council tax, the gas, the electric, the Wi-Fi, the water in your name because you're only going to be there 6 to 9 months and then you're going to leave. So why would you want to set up all those bills in your name? It's inconvenient and tedious. So that's another problem for short-term tenants and guests. Quality of life. If you're living in a hotel, which is what most of these short-term tenants or guests are doing, then you can't cook for yourself. Sometimes you can barely even open a window properly. This doesn't create a very good quality of life. Whereas if you come and stay in one of our rent to rent houses, then you'll have a kitchen. It may be a shared kitchen or your own kitchenette if they're self-contained bedsits or flats. But at least you have somewhere to cook. You'll have somewhere to sit and eat food. You'll be able to go outside. There's normally a garden or an outside space. You'll be able to open the windows as wide as you want to. These subtle differences create a much better quality of life. So we've got all of these problems here for tenants and guests, the end user of the product that you're going to create when you start a rent-to-rent business. And you've got all of these problems here for the landlord, who's your ideal client. And your rent-to-rent business sits in the middle. It solves all of these problems for the landlord, and it solves all of these problems for the tenants or guests. So going back to the first principles of money, money flows where value is created, and value is created when a problem is solved. Well, your rent-to-rent business solves all of these problems, and there's actually more problems that it solves, but these are just some of the main problems, to name a few. So if you can solve these problems, then money is going to flow to you because you've created value by fixing these issues. So let's start there. This is why rent-to-rent works so well, because you're actually solving a lot of problems for both the landlord and the tenants. So now let's have a look at what you should be doing day to day to find these rent-to-rent properties and to get to a position where you can solve these problems for the landlord and the tenants. Now, this is the framework that I like to use. I teach this in my program. It's called the MOSA framework. And what MOSA stands for is M for marketing, O for offers, S for sales, and A for action. So let's look at marketing to start off with. Now, this is where most of your energy should go in the beginning. You have to tell everyone what it is that you do. You have to tell everyone how you can help them. And first, you need to identify your ideal customer. So as we've just discussed, your ideal customer as a rent-to-rent operator is a landlord, but more specifically, it needs to be a landlord who's experiencing some sort of pain, some sort of problem, whether it be vacancies, maintenance issues, tenant management, legal compliance. They have to be experiencing some sort of discomfort to be open to your service. If everything's great and they've got an amazing house and it's fully tenanted, and there's no maintenance issues, no legal compliance issues, then the chances are they're not going to be in enough pain to want your solution. So they won't be the right fit for you. So you need to get really good at identifying your ideal customer and being really specific with this person. Who are they? What are they like? What do they do for a job? What's their mindset? The more specific you can get with this person, the more you can target all of your marketing and your messaging towards them. So for example, my ideal customer with rent-to-rent is normally a 50 to 60-year-old HMO landlord who's grown tired of landlording. They normally own more than 3 or 4 properties. They've accumulated a fair bit of wealth over the last 20 to 30 years, and they're more concerned with having passive income and no hassle rather than scraping every single penny out of their assets. They're willing to free up a portion of the income to get their time back and to not deal with any stress. So that's my ideal customer, that exact type of person. So I only really try and target that type of person. And most of my marketing, my messaging is targeted towards that type of person. So you have to find these people and you have to speak to them and tell them what it is that you do and tell them how you can solve these problems. The way that you do this is by doing outreach. So emails, calls, letters, door knocking, walk-ins, and online messaging. These are all things you should be doing. If you haven't got your first rent-to-rent deal yet, then you should be doing these things all the time. Emailing landlords, calling estate agents, sending letters to landlords, going or knocking on landlords' doors, walking into estate agents and offering your services, sending messages online. These are all the things you have to be doing if you haven't got your first rent-to-rent deal. You can't be too proud to be doing these things. You have to be humble and hungry. If you haven't got a deal yet, then it's because you haven't spoken to enough people or you're not good enough at communicating your service yet. And to get good, you have to do things over and over again. So you need to be doing outreach. I normally send at least 20 emails a week. I normally call at least 10 to 15 landlords. I send around 400 letters every single quarter of the year. I haven't knocked on doors in years, but I would do if I needed to, and I hadn't got any rent-to-rent deals. I'd be knocking on doors. I used to walk into estate agents and offer my services all the time. I send around 20 to 30 online messages every single week without fail. Even when I don't need a rent-to-rent deal, I still do this because it keeps the knife sharp, it keeps the momentum going, and it keeps us moving forward. You never know where a lead will come from. So the more you do this outreach, the higher the probability of you finding the right landlord who's experiencing these problems that you can solve. So once you've got your marketing dialed in, the next thing you need to be doing is offering. So you're viewing lots of properties, you're speaking with landlords and agents. The next step is to start making offers, and not just any offer. You need to craft an enticing offer. Our most recent offer was a long-term agreement. We offered to increase the rent by 5 or 6% every year. We offered to cover 6% of the rent for maintenance, and we offered to pay market rent. So you have to craft an enticing offer. It can't just be basic. It needs to sound compelling. It needs to sound better than any other option the landlord has. We don't charge them any tenancy fine fees. We offer them a long-term fixed guaranteed rent, and we create a solution that allows them to benefit from passive income with no hassle. And that's what all landlords want. So you have to get good at crafting an enticing offer. You need to be able to communicate this offer in a personal way. So I speak to all of my landlords on WhatsApp, on the phone. They like our service because they know if they need me, they can contact me directly, and they're going to be one of around 10 customers or 10 clients. They're not going to be one of 200 like they would be if they were to work with a local letting agency. So they're going to be a priority of mine, and they like that. They want to get a more bespoke service. So personalized communication is key with your offer. You need to solve problems, add value, and be the solution. The next letter in the MOSA framework is sales. So you need to create a sales funnel. I don't mean an online sales funnel. I mean a system that you use where you're doing your marketing, you're making offers, but then how do you close those offers? You need to either have an email sequence that you use, or a couple of specific phone calls, some conversations that you have to close. You need a framework that consists of closing conversations that put the landlord at ease, makes them feel comfortable with working with you, removes all their fears, handles all of their objections, and gets the deal signed and agreed on. Once you're at that stage, you then need to track your sales metrics. If I know I'm going to send out 100 messages, I know I'm going to make around 5 offers. And out of those offers, I'm only going to be able to close around 1 or 2 of those. But I'm going to track those metrics. This allows things to become predictable. And then you start to create a system. Once you've got to this stage, you've created your sales process, your sales funnel, you're tracking your sales metrics. You then get to A, which is action. Now, action is when you set clear goals. So you look at what's working and you double down on it. You review and adjust what you've been doing, what's been working, what hasn't. You iterate and improve. And then once you've done all of that, you increase your volume and you increase your action. So you go back to the start, you go back to marketing, and rather than sending 100 messages out, you send 200. So once you've got your marketing dialed in, your offers perfected, your sales process dialed in, you then review, adjust, and increase the action. And if we look down here at our MOSA funnel, in terms of effort and energy and volume, at the top of the funnel, when you start marketing, this should be where you put maximum effort in and maximum volume. You need to send as many emails as possible, make as many calls as possible, send as many letters as possible, knock as many doors as possible, do as many walk-in to estate agents as possible, and send as many online messages as possible. Once you've done that, you're going to get some warm leads after doing all of that outreach and marketing, and then you need to craft some enticing offers to a fewer amount of people. So in the next layer of the MOSA funnel, you're going to be doing less volume and more focus on crafting the correct offer, personalizing your communication, solving problems, adding value, and being the solution to these landlords. Then when you get down to S in the MOSA funnel, sales, even less volume and even more focus. So once your potential clients get through to sales, this is when you're about to close them. You'll be speaking to less people, so there'll be less volume. You would have whittled the people down, and you should only be speaking to between 1 to 4 people trying to close them. Track your sales metrics and master these numbers. And then when you get to A, which is action, review, adjust where you need to, and then increase the volume of what's working. So basically double down on everything. If you sent out 100 messages, 100 emails, try and send out 200. And then the knock-on effect will be more offers and more sales. And then you keep repeating this process. So you review, adjust, and then you go back to the top and start marketing again. This is my MOSA framework. I teach this in more detail inside my program, but this is what you need to do to get your first rent to rent deal. Stick to these tactics, understand the first principles of money, become valuable. Money flows where value is created. So you have to create value, solve these landlords' problems, solve these tenant and guest problems, be the solution in the middle, implement the MOSA framework, marketing, offers, sales, and action. I hope this has made sense to you guys. If you want someone to help you get your first rent to rent deal, then I'll put a link in the description below. Click the link and you'll be able to book a call in with myself. On that call, we'll have a conversation and work out if we're the right fit for each other. If not, then just copy this framework, implement it into your business, and I guarantee you'll get your first rent to rent deal. I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.